Hello, DPS community. Welcome to the EDUCA DPS Podcast, where we inform families and connect communities. My name is Javier Ibarra, your host of the EDUCA DPS Podcast in English. Today in the studio, we have Selena Nakamura, Director of Internal Communications for Denver Public Schools. Selena, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, good. I'm happy to be here in our beautiful studio. This is my first time.
We are excited to have you. You've been here for so long. Can you tell us, how long have you been with DPS? And then what has been, of all the time you've been here, one of your favorite moments of your career?
Good question. So I'm coming up on 8 years with the district. I started in Choice. I was a temp right out of college when I processed paper applications before we moved to the online system. Mm-hmm. I did that for a few months, and then I got hired into HR, where I hired our lunchroom workers. I did that for a full school year. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I went into communications as a coordinator. I did that for, I think, 2 years, and then decided to leave the district to go pursue my master's degree at the University of Denver.
Right on. Congrats.
Thanks. So while I was attending DU, I actually got a job there at the Mortgage College of Education, and I did their digital marketing for a year and a half. And then DPS called me back and were like, hey, come back. And I was like, okay, done. So I've been with DPS since then, and really love the work here. I think my favorite moment, there's so many. But I would have to say just going out into the schools. I remember during COVID, we were rolling back remote school, mm-hmm. and they had some of us from central office going out to schools to volunteer 1 day a week. And mm-hmm. so I went to Westerly Creek every Friday, and I facilitated kids doing their specials. And it was kind of funny because they had all these kids in a library, mm-hmm. and they were sectioned off. So this section was doing gym class, this section was doing music, and so they're all together but separate. And so it's just cool to see how these kids were adaptive and so quick to just get with change. I wish that adults were more like that sometimes.
Yes, don't we all?
But yeah, I think that was one of the highlights of my time at DPS.
What an amazing career. What an amazing opportunity that we have had to have someone like you work with us for so long. I often say, and you hear me say this in the office, that there are lifers here at DPS, and I consider you one of the lifers here.
Same to you.
Oh,
we can't
I'm
leave.
hoping I can. So I want to introduce the topic for our audience. Today the topic is going to be multilingual communications. So the Denver Public Schools Multilingual Communications Office is a team of professionally trained individuals who dedicate their linguistic knowledge to breaking down communication barriers for DPS families by providing translation and interpretation services. And that's why we have Selena here, who leads this team. So Selena, my first question for you is, what is the mission of the multilingual communications team here at DPS?
Yeah, so we have two teams within the multilingual communications team. We have our translations team and our interpretations team. And really the goal of both teams is just to provide families and students in our community with their language services in their language, whether it's translations or interpretations. So they have quality education and quality language services.
I want to ask, this is for our listeners, of course, can you clarify the difference between an interpreter and a translator?
Yes, so an interpreter is someone who does spoken language services, and translations is written language services.
I'm glad that you clarified that for us, because until I started here at DPS, I didn't know. And so I always said, as I speak Spanish, and my mom predominantly only speaks Spanish, so I would often translate what other folks were saying, but now I know that I interpreted.
Yep.
And translating is when it's more of a written document.
Yep, exactly.
And so for our folks listening, I want to ask, so I know we do a lot of this, how many languages does the multilingual communications team serve?
So we serve roughly 200 different languages.
Wow.
But our most 8 spoken languages are Amharic, Arabic, Chinese, French, Nepali, Somali, Spanish, of course, and Vietnamese.
Working here at DPS has given us a lot of opportunities to learn some of these languages, and recently we were able to do this video for Arab American Heritage Month, and I learned how to say peace, which is salam, and how to say thank you, which is shukran. And so I'm sure I butchered how to say that, but the point is I learned that. Selena, I want to ask, how many people are on the multilingual communications team? It seems like there's a lot of work here.
Yeah, there's a lot of work, but not a lot of people in-house. So we have 8 people total. We have 5 people on the translations team and 3 on the interpretations team. And between the 8 of them, they're from 6 different countries and speak 6 different languages. So they're well-versed. Of course, we have a smaller team, so any work that we can't do in-house is then outsourced to our DPS-approved vendors. So we use those vendors a lot.
What is the most requested language for interpretation and translation that comes through your department?
Do you want to take a guess?
I want to say it's Spanish.
Yep. Spanish is our most requested language for translations and interpretations.
It would make sense. The majority of our students are Spanish-speaking students, more so with the newcomers that have arrived here in the last, I want to say, year. So it would make sense that those folks. And it's so great that we have the department already established. Because if I'm not wrong, a lot of other school districts don't have a department like we do. Am I correct in saying that?
I believe so.
Yeah?
I think that's correct.
And so and we've had the opportunity very recently to interact with some of those school districts, and they're always asking questions to us about how we do these things. And I like to think it starts with our people, right? The folks that are on your team. Every time that I have a very early meeting, I'm talking maybe 7:30 a.m., they are already there. And every time that I leave past 5, 6 p.m., they are still there. And so if anyone can attest to the work that they're doing, it's amazing work, and they do it relentlessly, right? There's so much going on in so many different languages and so many students that I just wanted to give them a quick shout out while we have this opportunity.
Yes, thank you for that. They are a very hardworking, very dedicated team. Like you said, they're there day and night. They're answering requests on their days off, just to make sure that students are being served. So.
The good news here is they won't have to interpret this show, because we also do it in Spanish.
Right. Yay.
Selena, what is the process for handling an interpretation or translation request within DPS? What does that look like? I think our parents, our community members want to know if, like, say, I want to get an interpretations request. What does that look like?
Yeah, so if families need to request interpretations or translations, they go through a DPS employee or their school, and then we get that request through our internal system, whether it's an interpretation or a translation. Our team gets that, they process the request, and then for translations at least, we get the document and they can see how many words are in the document and then assign out from there. If they have capacity, we'll have an in-house translator translate the document. If not, then we'll send it out to a vendor. And then for interpretations, they also receive the request, process it, and then they assign an interpreter if it's an in-person meeting to go to that location at the meeting time designated area or school building and go from there.
Selena, I want to ask a follow-up question to that. And I think a lot of our audience members and some folks out there will ask, why don't you use Google Translate? Why isn't that a valuable source now that it's getting so advanced? Why don't we use Google Translate to translate all of our documents?
Yeah, that is a good question. And in terms of essential information and getting that out to families, we use human people to do translations and interpretations because the quality there is not matched by Google Translate. So Google Translate can't understand the nuance or the tone or, the real meaning behind a translation or an interpretation, whereas a human can. And so those ones that are done by humans are more authentic and they resonate more with people who need that information.
I'm glad you said that because I've used that translation services from time to time, and the documents that I receive from your team for what I ask for are an interpretations or I should say translation that matches what the community that I come from would say. And it's interesting how my mind works because I would say that in English and I would say that in Spanish, but it's very different. There are things that don't translate 100%. I would say a lot of our sports references, right? In the English language, particularly here in the U.S., we use a lot of sports references that don't necessarily translate. I think One of the phrases that really gets me is the window, like to say two dates, like this is the window that you have to apply. That doesn't translate, at least in Spanish it doesn't translate. Yep. But also I know that there are more than one type of Spanish, right? There's the Spain Spanish, of course, but then you have all of the South or Latin American Spanishes that come in. So I think that's probably why folks wouldn't want to use a service like Google Translate, because it's hard to resonate with that community if you don't do it. And more than anything, they can tell where you're disingenuous. We went to that conference where we talked about how much AI is too much AI, and that's at the point where it's no longer authentic. Selena, my next question for you is, of all the great things that your team does, is there a cost to this? Do our families have to pay for interpretations and translation services?
Nope, they do not. So interpretations and translations are fully funded by the district. Those costs will never, ever hit families.
So it's safe to say that if a family wants an interpreter at their student's graduation, there's no cost there?
Nope.
For parent-teacher conferences, there's no cost?
No cost.
What about the stuff that the district translates or interprets? I'm getting messed up. Translates the large documents, like let's say the strategic roadmap. Like let's say I'm a parent. I would love to see what the strategic roadmap looks like. Is there a cost to me so that I can see that in my language?
No. And with those larger reports, we usually get those translated in all of our 8 most spoken languages. And so those will be available regardless. But if there's a language that a family wants to receive a document in that we haven't already translated into, they can reach out to me or anyone from my team, and we're more than happy to get that translated or an interpreter out for any other languages that aren't available.
So it's safe to say that if it's something critical or something that all parents should know across the district, that it will be a given that it's translated in all of our 8 most spoken languages.
Yep. Yeah, as long as it's deemed essential information, which I would argue everything is essential information,
yes.
Then yes, it would be in those 8 languages.
Well, thanks for clearing that up for us. My next 2 questions have to do with metrics, numbers. Some folks want to know.
Yeah.
In the 2023-24 school year, how many words were translated by your team?
So we had over 5,576 requests, and those total to about 9 million words that were translated just this school year. 9 million words.
Yep. Where do you find the time to do all of this?
Our team, like I said, they dedicate so much of their resources and their time to meet all of these requests, but those vendors are also super, super helpful in helping us meet all of the requests that we receive.
So we talked about translations. Now let's talk about interpretation services. How many interpretation services were provided in the 23-24 school year?
Yeah, so we had about 8,282 requests as of June 5th. I know that the team still had some other interpretation requests that they were meeting after the fact, so that number may change. But in total, they had over 8,000, and I think about 20,000 phone interpretations that they completed this year.
Wow. When I first started in the district, one of the things that amazed me the most, and I'm fairly new, right? I've only been here about 3 years, not quite life, as some people might say. But something that really interested me was you have these cards that you give parents, and it says, I would like a interpreter in my language. And parents can take that card to the school, and then that's how you get the phone interviews. And so that's why I wanted to kind of highlight that, because a lot of folks will say, well, how do you get an interpreter on the phone? And it's folks that on the spot would like an interpreter. And we have these services. And we have these services for a reason, so that our families can take advantage of. Recently, I was at several events for the school district. We were at a CPAC meeting, we were at graduation, and we were at another community meeting. And at all of these meetings or events that we had, there was an interpretations table front and center with folks who were ready to interpret, and they had these little gadgets, like headphones, so that they could interpret in real time. And I thought that was so cool. And so wanted to give that piece. Selena, my next question for you is, what DPS materials does your team translate that our parents might receive at home? And we already touched a little bit on this, but what are some of the ones that are more common?
Report cards, enrollment packets if they're in transition grades, invitations to events, attendance letters, menus, the list just goes on and on.
School menus.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a product of DPS, and everything that was sent home to my mom was in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm starting to think back that it was probably folks who still work in your department who helped do that, even though this was quite a few years ago when I was still a student.
Mm-hmm.
Selena, I want to thank you for your time here with us, but before I go, do you have a final message for us?
I would say, especially for those who are requesting services for translations and interpretations, if there's any need to contact our team or put in a request right away, just because the vendors that we outsource to, we share with other organizations like the state, other school districts, other organizations, and so it's sometimes hard to find vendors at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
So I really urge schools to reach out and put in those requests as soon as they can so we can make sure that those requests get filled, especially for interpretations, because those requests, if they come in a little bit later or a little bit last minute, it's really hard to find an interpreter who can be there available at that time in person.
Right.
And it's also really important to make sure that any information that they have about the meeting, they include that in the request so that we can give our interpreter all the information they need in terms of time, location, a contact number, everything that they need so they can just go in, do the meeting, give great service, and then be on their way to their next appointment.
So just to recap everything that we've talked about today, families looking for interpretations or translation services, go to your school.
Yep.
And then schools know to contact your team in order to get connected. And there's no cost.
No cost.
Never.
Never.
Never, ever.
Nope.
All right. Well, Selena, I want to thank you for joining us here today. This wraps up our EDUCA DPS podcast. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Thank you to our guest, Selena Nakamura, for this important information. I want to ask our audience to please share this episode, right? There was so much valuable information. So please share our EDUCA DPS podcast with your relatives, friends, and the entire DPS community. If you liked this show and many others, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Public Schools Plus. And you can also find us on your main podcast platforms. Just search for the Denver Public Schools Podcast. A big thank you to our Communications Department and to our proud Superintendent of Denver Public Schools, Dr. Alex Marrero, for the support to EDUCA and all of our multimedia productions. Please remember to tell your children more often. Selena, help me say this phrase. I believe in you, and I know you can do it. Until next time.